The voice inside our head can be cruel. We would never talk to other people the way we talk to ourselves. Hello, friend. My name's Zach, and I'm an anxiety management coach. And I have an inner critic, just like you do. And if we're not careful, we can handle the inner critic wrong, and it can overwhelm us. So what we're tempted to do is we're tempted to either ignore the inner critic, or agree with the inner critic. Those two postures do not work. See, when we try to ignore the inner critic, it just gets louder and louder and louder. Have you ever experienced that? Where you feel negative about yourself and you just try to ignore it, and it almost becomes deafening and can consume you? In fact, if you want to know what your inner critic is telling you, if you're not too familiar with it, pay attention to what your inner critic says when you do not meet your own expectations. That's your inner critic. For me, it'll tell me I'm not good enough. Something's wrong with me. Others can do it better. It just bullies and unrelenting. And the more I tried to ignore it in my own life, the louder the voice got. And perhaps you're tempted to just agree with the inner critic. Well, that feels terrible. That's not a good path either. So let's talk about what we should do with that inner critic. And this is really uncomfortable. Just got to be honest. But we must state concretely as possible what the inner critic is saying. Just write it down. When your inner critic goes rogue and gets loud, what does your critic tell you? And write them down. If you want to do that right now, I suggest just pausing the video and writing it down. Sometimes we get stuck in our own mind, and we don't even realize to the extent our inner critic is bullying us. The first time I wrote down what my inner critic said, I was horrified with what I told myself. So I know it's not an easy process, but it'll be worth it. Okay, after you've done that, after you've wrote down all those angry, mean, terrible messages, I want you to use some adjectives to describe that. Describe what your inner critic sounds like. For me, mine's a bully. Mine's unrelenting. Mine's a jerk. Like, these are not good things. For you, what is it? How would you describe your inner critic? Just write down several adjectives. When you're done with that, we got a next step. How does your inner critic help you? How does it protect you? You might be tempting to say it doesn't. And I would argue that's not true. It is doing something, even though it's being a jerk. For me, my inner critic helps me to perform. It's unrelenting and never satisfied. I will work my butt off, right? That has helped me in my life. In fact, when I was younger in my life, I embraced the inner critic. The inner critic helped me lift weights more. The inner critic helped me to be better at football. It helped me to be better at school. The inner critic did help me. It had some, and then I got praised for it. How does it protect you? Just write that down. And then if you're very familiar with your inner critic, this next step will be easy. But how does it harm you? Where does it let you down? Where does it imprison you? Write those things down. It's good to have a full picture of the inner critic, of where it helps and where it hurts. See, for me, my inner critic, if I just listen to it, how it harms me is it wouldn't let me get close to anyone. Because if they knew the real me, they wouldn't love me, is what the inner critic told me early in my youth. So it isolated me, made me exhausted. There was no room to rest with the inner critic. For you, where does it harm you? I have a next question for you with your inner critic. But first, a statement about the inner critic. Your inner critic will tell you always and never It over-exaggerates what's going on to make you feel small. See, always and never are things that humans, which you are one, cannot meet. But what might it look like to embrace your human sizeness? So if your inner critic is demanding perfection, what would good enough look like? If your inner critic is making you always needing to be liked, what would the human size version of that be? What would embracing human size look like for the things that your inner critic tells you? See, we all have things that our inner critic goes off around. Mine's performance and how people view me. That's where my inner critic really goes. So if I feel like I wasn't the best version of myself meeting with people, my inner critic will go off telling me that I just ruined those relationships. What would the human size version of that look like for you? And write that down. At this point, you're going to have a lot of things written down, right? We're going through a process here. The next step. What are some adjectives that describe God? I know that might sound a little odd at first, but indulge me. Write down some adjectives that describe God. For me, He's kind. He's loving. His love never fails, in fact. Write adjectives that you think of. The next step is a question for you. What if you were as kind to yourself as God is towards you? I don't think we think about this often enough, that we become harder on ourselves than God is. See, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to ignore the inner critic. We're not going to agree with the inner critic. We are going to put a lens of the way God views you over what the inner critic is saying. I'll give some practical example from my life. Yesterday, I met with a group of friends that I meet with every Tuesday morning. And I left feeling like I talked too much. In fact, I talked to one of them about it. And it's been a couple weeks in a row. It's something that I needed to actually discuss. The inner critic pointed out a problem. But then when I left, the inner critic started to bully me. And one of the things I was able to do is to put that lens of kindness. See, the inner critic wanted to say that I wasn't liked, that something was wrong and flawed with me, and that's why I was talking so much. But the lens of kindness over it, I was able to see that the inner critic was actually a helpful guide when he was calm and not a jerk. It pointed out a problem. Talking too much. I was. It's the rest of the junk with it that we want to remove. So as a father, sometimes the inner critic goes off and tells me I'm being a bad father when I messed up with my kids. If I ignore it, I'm not pointing out, oh, there is a mess up that happened. But if I agree with it, I make it all about me and not the problem. So the lens of kindness would be like, yes, I messed up and God gives me grace. Do I need to apologize for what I just did? See, as we start to look at this inner critic with a lens that God views us, slowly, it's not going to happen at once, my friend, but slowly over time, God invades that part of our life. And our inner critic no longer is a bully, but more of a helpful guide along the way. This has massively changed my life. And I know that it'll massively change your life, given some time. God bless you as you wrangle that inner critic and return to viewing yourself with love and kindness, just like God views you.